What's the crime rate in your neighborhood?
Okay,
How do you
so we'll
know?
see if
You
this
might
works for you
go on
guys.
what you've seen or heard, but experts use specific tools to measure crime. Societies have kept track of crime for many centuries. They keep track of crime in order to assess the effectiveness of the criminal justice system and test various criminal justice theories. In the U.S., experts typically use one or both of two well-known criminal justice reports in order to measure crime and assess crime rates. The first is the Uniform Crime Reports, or UCR. This report contains crime statistics compiled by the FBI. The UCR program began in 1929 and is based on aggregate statistics,
So think about the
which
date,
represent
1929,
total
Great
counts of crimes
Depression. They want
reported
to
to
kind
the
of measure what's
police,
going on.
including arrests, but no details regarding individual incidents. Compliance with UCR is voluntary, meaning state and local law enforcement agencies choose whether or not to report their statistics. Around 95% of all law enforcement agencies participate.
So it's probably pretty
The
valid.
second is the National Crime Victimization Survey, or NCVS. This information is collected every 6 months by the U.S. Census Bureau and
Which you
compiled
guys
into
should have
an
gotten in the
annual
mail
report by the
today,
Bureau of Justice
yesterday.
Statistics.
Census,
The
take that. Make sure your parents
NCVS has
send that
been
in,
used since
especially now. We're going to need the
1972.
money.
It collects information related to victimization, victims, type of crime, crime location, offenders, and whether or not victims reported the crimes.
So we're talking
Notice that
way
the
more
NCVS
details.
captures statistics the UCR does not, since the NCVS includes crimes that aren't reported to the police. Throughout United States history, crime rates have experienced both highs
So
and
if you
lows.
look at the highs and lows, it's
Certain
probably going to
notable
tie to
periods in history are
economics.
associated with crime waves or peaks in the crime rate. For instance, crime increased throughout the 1920s and early 1930s during the Prohibition era.
Which is why the
The
21st Amendment
UCR
came
began
along.
collecting and reporting data toward the end of this era. You might expect a higher crime rate due to violations of the alcohol ban. However, the number of serious, violent crimes also increased during Prohibition. This is the period during which organized crime first flourished. Organized crime refers to any group of two or more people working together in an illegal
Okay,
activity.
so this is a kind of a sort of
These
deal
types
where
of
people are working
organizations were
together.
around
It's
before
not just
Prohibition,
individuals doing it.
running illegal prostitution and gambling rings. During Prohibition, criminals organized in order to bootleg liquor. The organizations illegally manufactured, stored, transported, and sold alcohol. On the tail end of Prohibition came the Great Depression.
Which is why
This
between the Great
severe economic
Depression
downturn started
and
during the Prohibition
which is
era
why
and
1929
lasted throughout the
UCR started up.
1930s. The Depression brought another rapid rise in crime, though not violent crime. Instead, theft and prostitution rates rose as desperate, unemployed workers sought ways to pay for food and shelter.
So look at the difference in crimes, organized crime versus
Crime rates rose again after World War II, slowly increasing during the Civil Rights
if you guys
era
look,
and
you guys
Vietnam
can see it
War.
went down during the war.
This
There weren't
time
that many
period
people
saw
when they were
many
off for war.
instances of civil disobedience, including rioting and protests.
So
Additionally,
rioting, protests,
there
these
was a
things are going to
post-war
count towards the crime
population
result,
boom,
so it's going to go
resulting
up.
in more American teenagers and young adults in the 1960s and 1970s than ever before. Both violent and property crime rates rose between 1960 and 1970.
So people
The
are
UCR
upset, or
measured a
there's economics going on.
176% increase. Around this time, crime became a national hot topic. By 1965, a poll showed that Americans viewed crime as the most serious issue in the country. This led President Lyndon B. Johnson to declare a war on crime. This 1965 initiative authorized several studies on crime in order to develop reforms and boost public confidence. This was a significant step in the federal government's role regarding crime,
So
because
crime
the
is
crime
typically
rate
more
was
of a
mostly
state thing
related
also.
to
The national
state
government
and
starts
local
getting
crimes.
involved.
Those crimes were considered to be beyond the jurisdiction of the federal government, so the federal government's previous involvement had been limited. In 1970, President Richard Nixon also declared or redeclared a war on crime in his State of the Union address. Nixon asked for and
So now
received
it's gonna go
federal
from just
financial
fighting
aid
crime
for
to more
state and local
politics.
law enforcement efforts. This was another significant step. Nixon followed up by declaring a war on drugs in 1971, though by the end of 1972,
Now, if you notice here, he's trying to get money back to the states. So one of the things you guys have to think about is how is Trump doing that now? He's enacting law so he can get money back to the states. He wants to get money to the people. They changed tax date. So you can kind of see that they can use politics to get money back to the states. What should be a state thing, they can now take over.
42% of Americans reported that they were afraid to walk in their own neighborhoods at night. The actual crime statistics didn't necessarily support this fear. The UCR showed a continual increase in the crime rate between 1970 and
I think it's an
1990.
AGR,
However,
UCR.
the NCVS largely showed a steady amount of crime reported by victims during that same time. Some experts believe that this means the crime rates largely remained the same, while the number of offenses entering the criminal justice system increased due to public awareness and political efforts. The UCR continued to show a rise in crime throughout the 1980s, peaking in the early 1990s. Violent crimes almost quadrupled, and property crimes more than doubled between 1960 and 1992.
So before it tells you,
But
think about
that
why.
was the top. The UCR and NCVS statistics agree that we've been on a downward slide since 1992. The decade before, however, is infamously known as the 1980s crime wave. But not all Americans felt the effects. Large urban areas seem to experience an increase in both property crimes and violent crimes through the early 1990s. In particular, homicide rates increased and gained widespread attention. Violent crime rates were higher among young males than ever before. Many experts pointed to the popularity of street gangs and a rising drug trade.
So there you have it.
Again,
Gangs
the president
and drugs,
responded.
which kind of go
Bill
together,
Clinton
right?
signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994. This act is the largest and most extensive crime-related legislation in U.S. history. The act covered a number of areas, including providing more funding for prisons, providing more funding for crime prevention programs, expanding the federal death penalty provisions, banning certain individuals from possessing firearms, and establishing new offenses relating to hate crimes, sex crimes, immigration, and gang-related crimes.
So if you guys look, money, increased punishments, banning certain individuals, and increased offenses, which is going to increase punishments.
Today's crime rates are similar to those of the 1960s. For example, the UCR reports a 48% reduction in violent crimes between 1993 and 2012, and more than a 50% reduction in homicides during the same time period.
Now,
the UCR's
just
latest
punishments,
2013
or were there
statistics
socioeconomic factors
continue
going
to
on?
show a steady decline in crime across the board. Criminal justice experts have posed some interesting possible reasons for the general reduction in
Check it out.
crime, including the increase in law enforcement and crime prevention aid granted through the Violent Crime Control and Law
Money.
Enforcement Act,
That's going to help.
an increase in the number of state and local law
So the
enforcement
more money for
officers,
state equals more police
a marked
officers.
increase in the prison population,
So people that recidivism,
a drastic
that's going to go
increase
down.
in the number of Americans imprisoned for drug-related crimes,
Notice more people in jail, less people
an
commit
aging
crimes.
population as the
And
baby boomer
we're getting
teenagers of the
older.
1960s
This idea
and
that there's
1970s
more older people
become
is going to lead
middle-aged
to the
and
fact there's
older.
less crime because older people don't commit crimes.
Let's review.
We're
In the
not going to
U.S.,
review
crime rates are measured
because you just watched the whole thing. All right. Take the quiz now, open up the next video, and then go from there.